Hello and welcome into this week's episode of Breaking Down Bloodline, where we look at a novel by Claudia Gray. If you're not familiar with the series, basically we are going through this book 2 chapters at a time, getting into the nitty-gritty of what happens and discussing it as we go. If you want to go back to the beginning of this book, you can go ahead and click here, and it will take you back to the first episode of this series. But today we're going to be talking about chapters 24 and 25. And for those of you keeping track at home, this book has 31 chapters, so we are coming up ever closer to the conclusion of this amazing book. Today we are continuing to follow the wake of the announcement and over the Senate that Leia is indeed the daughter of Darth Vader, and the aftermath that comes from that. We see Joff and Greer hanging out in the Mirror Bright. They're going to have a meeting with Leia. Joff has not seen her since this announcement has gone through, and he is really struggling with this idea that she could be Vader's daughter, to the point of even considering the idea that Vader may have forced himself on Padme, and that Luke and Leia would be the product of that encounter, and that gruesome image is somehow more probable to him than the idea of Vader having a wife and having children and basically being a good person ever. Greer shuts that down, saying that there's no mention of Vader and Padme alive at the same time, and so she thinks that, it is what it seems like, that Anakin had a wife and had children. And Joff really struggles with this, and I think this is the scary part of Anakin Skywalker's tale. Obviously, not all of us are Force sensitive. If any of you are, I'd love to know. And to that extent, we can't really compare to Anakin's journey completely. But this idea that somebody who could feel so human, who could have such human emotions, who could love, who could have kids, who could do all of these things that we kind of idolize, especially at least in Western culture, but really in cultures across the globe, I think, that this could be somebody who could fall to the dark side. And of course, we know that story in a way that Joff does not. It makes Vader more tangible, right? So he's talked about how Vader was always kind of the boogeyman, and he knew he was real, but didn't really want to think about it that way, and this makes Vader a very real person. Greer is still struggling with this, but she is very much having the, if Han is okay with it, I'm okay with it idea. The fact that Han knew and entered into their marriage anyway is good enough for Greer. Joff struggles with that, noting that Han was always the type of guy to take risks anyway, so it didn't seem that outlandish that he would choose to take a risk here. It's at this point that Leia shows up, and all of Joff's worries kind of fall away. He's already kind of built her up in his mind as now being scarier and evilier, which isn't a word, but her arriving and seeing her as this darker figure, and she shows up and she's Leia who's lost a lot of her vitality, who seems so tired and broken because of everything she's going through, and that immediately snaps Joff back into seeing Leia for who he's known her to be and for being a person, not somebody that has to live in Vader's shadow. Joff specifically thinks of the line, "Answer suffering with kindness," which is from his home world, and it specifically mentioned that this is not something that he's necessarily always thought about, but that it's something that he sees and understands the need for now. They both leave, and we stay with Greer. Greer is feeling tired and worn down and starts thinking about her medical condition. Now, we had heard something about her medical condition back in the Senate bombing chapter. One of the med droids checked her out and scanned and said something about a pre-existing condition. So she is thinking about that mysterious pre-existing condition now, and she's weighing whether or not she should go in for another dose, which could be very dangerous to her, to help treat whatever it is she is suffering from. We then go to see Castrofo. Castrofo is not seeing anyone. He doesn't want to talk to anyone. He doesn't want to revel in the glory of his political moment. For him, outing Leia as Vader's daughter was all about truth and openness and honesty. It was not about a political move, even though his fellows want to make it a political move. So he's trying to avoid everyone. He eventually sends his staff away. What's interesting is he talks about his staff, sends his staff away, but I find it odd that we spend so much time with Leia's staff and no time really with Castrofo's. And that's not really a bad thing. It would be a lot more characters to add. It would be a whole nother dynamic. It would be a whole other thing to work through. But I think the reason why is to show the uniqueness of Leia's relationship. She has a very unique relationship with Greer, which we now understand because of where these chapters go. She has very close ties to Corey, both because I think that's just who Leia is, and because, I mean, Corey's father was mentioned in the Aftermath books, so there is a connection there. But I think it's intentional that Leia's relationship with her staff is unusual, and we see the more normal relationship between Castorpho and his staff. But I think it also shows a little bit more how isolated Castorpho might really be. It's at this point that Leia barges in to his office to finally confront him after all of this has happened. They get in an argument, as they've been wont to do throughout this book, to the point where Castorpho even, accuses her of being a spy, that maybe all the times the Empire almost found the rebellion, it could have been Leia releasing their information, and that she could be responsible for so many bad things that have happened, and Leia shoots that down. Like, she didn't know. She couldn't have been a spy because she didn't know who her father really was, and she did almost die, and she was tortured. And I think that's when it hits Castorpho that she wasn't lying and she wasn't making up stuff about her past, and that she could have this complicated relationship with her father. Leia brings up the point again that she hadn't even told Ben, her son, about it yet, and Castorpho's like, you had plenty of time, like, you can't put that on me that you waited all of these years. So they're having this back and forth about their two perspectives on her being Vader's daughter. The other thing that Leia mentions is that the only father she really considers her father is Bail, and Vader took Bail from her. The Empire took Alderaan from her, and so she's just really upset that he would be so afraid of Vader that he would forget about her, that he would let go of all of the friendship between them. Leia smashes some stuff in his office, ironically using the helmet that he had gotten earlier in the book, leaves, and then there's this really poetic moment, which Gray is so good at doing, where he's picking up the shards of glass in his office, that he could get Leia in trouble for coming in and, like, assaulting his office and everyone would believe her, but because he doesn't care about the politics of it, he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to bring attention to this private moment they had, so he starts picking up the broken display case himself and cuts himself on a piece of glass. And I think that's a very poetic moment where he's bleeding internally, emotionally, not like medically internal bleeding, but like emotionally internally bleeding. And now he's externally bleeding, cut by the shards of the Empire. There's a lot of layers going on there in terms of metaphor that Gray just hits you with out of nowhere. In the next chapter, chapter 25, Leia is addressing the Senate. She is withdrawing her nomination as the populist person to become first senator, and she gives a little speech about herself, and she's like, yeah, Vader's daughter, also Padme's daughter, and she had this big long history, and she got to feel good and excited talking about her mother, that she came to learn more and understand. Leia also talks about how she knows that Luke believes Vader redeemed. That was never a moment she got to share with Anakin, because she didn't have that quiet moment in his last few minutes the way Luke did. But she also specifically means, regardless of how she feels about it, she cannot bring up redemption to the Senate floor, because that's going to fly right back in her face. She can only talk about the other good that came from other parts of her family, as well as her own suffering at the hands of Vader or what have you. And she talks about her brother Luke, and how Luke has been this great figure and hero too, and how they shouldn't be Vader shouldn't reflect on them in that way. It's at this point that Carisi gets up to speak, and she tries to make this about Luke. Leia is horrified. She didn't bring up her brother necessarily as a shield. She certainly didn't bring up her brother so he could get dragged to the mud, and that's exactly what Carisi is doing. Now, I meant to mention this earlier when we found out she was with the First Order, and I forgot. Now's as good a time as any. But if you go back to the episode in which we read chapter 11, I read a passage to you guys about Lady Carisi, and I want to go back to it again. There's a point in the narration surrounding Carisi that says, at the very end of the chapter, 134 in the paperback edition, but it's the last page of chapter 11, a day when the galaxy would again be rightly governed, the strength of the centrist world would be revealed like a sword finally pulled away from its scabbard, and Lady Carisi would be one of those who brought that day to dawn. So Carisi has been with the First Order this whole time, or trying to start the First Order this whole time. So Carisi sees this as an opportunity to not just bring down Leia, but is trying to capitalize in bringing down Luke as well. Luke is probably an afterthought, but an advantage, and if she can bring down or taint the memory of the Last Jedi, shall we say, or certainly the Jedi Master, for presuming Luke's academy is still standing at this point, as well as Leia, that only goes well for her. It's at this point that Gar speaks up and deflects and points out again that the New Republic has a policy where children are not punished for what their parents have done. Of course, this was meant to be like, if your parent was an imperial bureaucracy chief at Station 85, that you can't be blamed for that. I don't think they really had Vader in mind when they got to that. But of course it would stand, and Luke and Leia should not necessarily be held accountable for anything Vader has done, because obviously they fought against Vader all that time. The meeting at the Senate ends with Leia needing to have, like, her vacation request processed. This was kind of funny to me. I'm like, do all senators have to have their vacation time, like, approved by everyone on the Senate? Like, is this just what the Senate does to fill time? It's kind of an odd thing, but I'm sure it was a story point. And the big tension there is that Casterfell lets it happen. He could easily have spoken up and been like, Leia's using that time to go on a clandestine and illegal mission, abusing her power, and he doesn't. This is Leia realizing that Casterfell just screwed up, that he wasn't really trying to make a political move like she accused him of, because he could have taken that opportunity, and that's something she tries to tell Greer and Joff later. They don't necessarily believe her, but she's kind of like, you know, why would he wait? And even if he doesn't, we can't control it, so we might as well keep going. Leia, Joff, and Greer are back on the Mirror Bright. I really liked Claudia Gray's line that she's describing how Leia looks and, like, this state she's found herself in, and Greer thinks, essentially, the princess looked like somebody who no longer gave a, and then it's cut off by Leia speaking. And it's really funny to me because there's the implication of a particular word that would go there. It's also funny because there is a Star Wars equivalent for that word that Gray could have easily used. So this is just a comedic beat in the writing, the idea that a character's thought narration is interrupted by another character's dialogue, which doesn't have to happen in a book, but it was just a fun writing moment that I appreciated. They plan to go on without worrying about Casterfell with the mission. Leia leaves, and after Leia leaves, Greer faints. So Joff catches her, calls her doctor, saying it's an emergency and that she's in trouble. The doctor shows up. Apparently it's not a critical emergency, but Greer is in a lot of pain, and has basically taken too much medicine for a mysterious condition. Joff looks this up and learns that her condition is something called bloodburn. If I'm not mistaken, bloodburn was first mentioned in this book. It would later go on to be mentioned in Rebel Rising by Beth Revis. It might be in a few other sources now. Bloodburn is the idea that it's an amazingly rare disease where you've basically been in space too much and your blood freaks out and starts slowly killing you. What's crazy about it is it's the idea of there's this illness or this disease that can't be cured in Star Wars. Because so much of Star Wars takes place in space, we like to think they have space medicine. They certainly don't seem to have a lot of the same illnesses we do. Certainly I've read very few Star Wars books where somebody had a common cold. They seem to have really nice space drugs, but even then they can't touch something like bloodburn because it's so rare. I'm presuming anyway, it's so rare that they don't really know how to treat it. What was interesting about this to me too is I don't remember something like this from the Legends universe. So it was adding this new element of somebody could be a fantastic pilot, but basically be killed by the thing they liked most. But this is Greer's mysterious disease. This is why she gave up racing. Han asked Leia to give her a job, so this is why the incredibly competent racer became an incredibly competent chief of staff. She still get to pilot sometimes, but in theory not to a point of total stress. It's why Greer, who seems so competent, always had to stay behind on the ship. Suddenly so many things from the book start to fall into place. And then Joff actually starts crying. One of the cultural things from his world is that you freely express emotion and you freely express sadness and compassion. So he starts crying, and Greer's like, what do I do with, like, I'm the one suffering, like, I don't need to take care of a puppy. But they have this really cute moment together. And that's where Joff realizes that he can be compassionate towards her, but he's not allowed to pity her. Like, she does not want pity. He has the line that pity will kill her faster than her disease will. So they have a very nice bonding moment, and this mystery is finally revealed to us. Leia sends another note to Han saying where she's off to. At this point, she has finally sent her note to Ben. We don't know anything about Ben. Ben has still been incommunicado this whole book, off with Luke somewhere. Leia's expressing again this isolation from them. I think, again, this is good in a story sense. We get to spend more time with Leia and see her disconnected from all these characters, but we also kind of feel that absence. Certainly with Han, but we've at least got to talk to Han. From a purely speculation point, we're left to wonder whether or not Ben got Leia's message, and whether or not Ben heard of his relation to Vader before or after he got Leia's message. What we don't know, and what we might find out very soon, this statement could become obsolete very quickly once the Kylo Ren comic comes out next month, but we don't know when Ben's exile from Luke's Jedi happened. We don't know when the infamous accidental lightsaber attack from Luke that caused Ben to freak out. We don't know when that moment happened. So when I read this book, I kind of wonder, are they really incommunicado on a training thing? Has this already happened and Leia has no idea it happened? Would she sense it when that happens? I don't know that Claudia Gray necessarily knew that when this got written either. She was probably, again speculation, but she was probably told just don't put them in there and have them mysteriously not be able to make communication, and they could decide how that wanted to go later. But it's important to note she has now reached out to Ben. We don't know how Ben has responded. She sent a sad, upset, emotional message to Han, but now she's sending a Han, this is where I'm going, this is what I'm doing, we're gonna get stuff done message. And she says, I love you, because it could be her final message to him. And the last thought she has by the end of the chapter is that somehow danger always feels more like home. Which makes sense for Leia. Leia has lived in danger for the vast majority of her life. But those are the chapters. I liked these quite a bit. It was a good way to continue getting a sense of how people feel because of the revelation with Leia. It was a good thing to see her interaction with Casterfo, just to hear more about Ben, that sort of thing. I wanted to address a comment I got on last week's video that was very thoughtful and had some very good points, but I also want to address them, and I thought it would be easier to do so in the video than in response. If you go to last week's video, you can see it. I didn't actually ask this person's permission to say their name in the video, so I'm not going to, but I'm not leaving it out on purpose either, but you can see it on last week's. I was talking about how quickly the Senate and everyone kind of forgot about Leia and forgot about everything like she's done and turned on her really quickly. And so the comment says, this actually addresses a common criticism of The Force Awakens and the sequel trilogy, that it's a retread and makes the victory of the OT pointless. In reality, we're seeing how well the New Republic learned lessons of the old too well. The Clone Wars were a manufactured threat coordinated by Force-sensitive leader of the Republic as a way to aggrandize his own power, which shout out for thank you for understanding that point, because I try to shout that to the heavens all day long and people don't understand what I'm talking about, so good on you. And now there's a potentially new Force-sensitive leader with a family with ties to the Empire talking about the threat to the Republic. As soon as you separate what you as the audience know from what the characters do, it makes perfect sense that the rest of the Senate doesn't rise in support of Leia. One thing there, at this point, Kylo is not Kylo, or at least if he is Kylo, people don't know it. So there is not necessarily this sense of Ben rising to be another evil leader yet. So that point I don't necessarily get, but I think you are very correct that the vast majority of certainly the galactic population and a lot of the Senate wouldn't necessarily rise in protection of Leia or defense of Leia. I do think, though, there are very specific people who could. Even, I think somebody like Lady Carisi would have. She's obviously in league with the First Order and wants to degrade Leia's interpretation. I think that there certainly is a wave of younger senators who would not care about Leia's past because it would be in the past, but there's also this implication of older senators who've been around for a while and absolutely would. And I think some of them don't rise to Leia to help Leia, not out of fear for the old way, but because they want the old way back, if that makes sense. But anyway, I really appreciate thoughtful comments like this one, especially if it's from something where I didn't explain it well or you disagree with me. And I never want to shout out or be mean or everyone go yell at this comment, but I really liked this comment and appreciated a thought like this. So thank you so much. Again, it probably doesn't matter if I say your name or not, but I just don't want to sound like I'm sending everybody whatever, but like I appreciate it, so thank you very much. Another quick note, because we've gotten to the end of today's video and the video's getting kind of long. I know I did that whole thing a couple of weeks ago where I was like, I'm gonna change the video to Sundays, and then I didn't because Resistance like was not changing when it was getting released like I thought it was. But this time I am gonna change the release date, and I'm probably not kidding. For the rest of the book, I'm probably gonna release these on Wednesday because of juggling Resistance reviews, Mandalorian reviews, and our rewatch of the Skywalker Saga films. So next week, don't panic if you don't see the video on Monday. Probably will finish out the book with Wednesday releases. Just so you guys know. Also, as one note, as long as I'm already making this video really long and we're doing a lot of random stuff at the end, after we're done with Bloodline, I'm going to pause the book club for a little while. I want to be able to focus entirely on the 2 shows we have, some of the comic material, which I'm going to try to be more timely on, especially the Kylo Ren comic, and the Rise of Skywalker itself. So once we're done with Bloodline, definitely all of December, I'm not picking up the book club again. I might start it up in January, but honestly, I might just start it up in February, and that way I can have January to focus on the Rise of Skywalker, and then take a break. So February is probably when we'll start the next book, and I want to know from you guys, especially people who watch the video. I'll probably do like a Twitter poll and ask in our Discord too, but like you who watch the video and watch all the way through the end, even through all of my really long boring announcements that no one cares about, you guys are the ones that I want to make the most happy because you're the ones who are with me all the way through, and I want to make stuff that you guys want to watch. So I want to start thinking about the next thing we'll read in February, but I want to do it on this series so I can hear from you guys. I personally want a break from post Return of the Jedi. We've done 4 books by the time this one's done, and I'm just kind of bored of that time. Not bored's the wrong word, but like, we've spent so much time in it, I want to go to a different time period. I really kind of want to do a Legends book, to be honest, and I don't know if you guys would be as interested in a Legends book, or if you want me to stay canon. So, I was thinking Shatterpoint by Matthew Stover, or Yoda Dark Rendezvous by Sean Stewart, or maybe both, which are Clone Wars novels from the Legends timeline, and the Legends timeline before Star Wars The Clone Wars came out. I think they'd be really interesting reads. So if that's something you guys would be interested, awesome. If not, if you want to stay in canon, I thought Catalyst would be a really good book to read, or maybe Dark Disciples, something like that. But those are just my thoughts. That's just what I'm throwing out there. Let me know what you guys would be interested in. It can be something I haven't recommended at all. My one request is, please, I just want a break from anything post Return of the Jedi, if that's okay. But that's what I got. I'm sorry for like 5 minutes of nothing. But go ahead for next week, Wednesday, read chapters 26 and 27. We're going to continue on with 2 chapters a week right up until the end. We should end about Thanksgiving week, or U.S. Thanksgiving week. With that, thank you all so much. Follow us on all the things. Join the Discord. Let me know what your thoughts are on these chapters, your thoughts on the next book to read, and I'll talk to you guys next week.